Today we're getting under the hood of women's health with Sarah Carvell, a sport and exercise psychologist. Sarah will be getting under the hood of mental wellness in sport. What inspired you to focus on positive mental health and well-being in the world of sports?
Yeah, so I guess, part of it, I was an athlete, but also when I've never looked at psychology before in my life before I did A level. So that kind of really triggered my interest in the area of like, oh, psychology, what's this? Because, when you think about sport, I guess it was always thought about from a physical, are they physically ready to go and, compete or train, or, are they ready so that they don't get injured, etc., etc. Or a lot of people would talk about sport from they're participating in sport because they're physically wanting to get a healthier. But actually, there's so much more research nowadays into looking at this from so many people participate in sport for mental health reasons and to ensure that they better their mental well-being. And then also, I guess, there's also that element of, it's so important now to mentally prepare for their sport. So I think that kind of really piqued my interest is when I started looking at psychology and the power that the brain can have, on individuals and humans, and then how that then links nicely into sport, and then obviously then put that train of thought a little bit further, actually then in terms of making sure our mental health and well-being, we can utilize sport as a vehicle to support that mental health and well-being and that mental wellness.
How do you help athletes build resilience and cope with setbacks or failures?
Yeah, so for me, setbacks and failures are a part of sport, right? They're a part of life. Okay. So I think I have there are two sort of trains of thought that I think about when I've got an athlete with me to try and help them if they're struggling with either, dealing with those setbacks, or if they want to build that resilience. And I guess the two trains of thought that I go down is one of those is all about developing that acceptance. Okay, normalizing the fact that setbacks are going to happen, mistakes are going to happen in sport. I don't think anyone has ever come off a pitch or a court or after participating in sport and said that was the perfect game, okay, or the perfect match. So actually, allowing them to accept that mistakes are going to happen, setbacks are going to happen, but actually let's think about this and normalize it. And I always say to them, yes, you make that mistake, but it's what you do after it. Okay, it's if you recover. Okay, it's if you reset yourself and refocus yourself, and then you go on again. And for example, when I work in football, a lot of the young lads, they are upset when they don't do something as well as they want to. But I say to them, yeah, but then you got back up and you ran really fast, and then you may have scored a goal, or you may have passed it to one of your players and your teammates, and they scored a goal. Okay, so it's what you've done after that, and then they really forget about the setback or the failure that they've experienced. So it's kind of one of the, areas is all about that acceptance and that normalizing, that mistakes are just, yeah, they're part and parcel, and setbacks are part and parcel of taking part in sport. And then the other avenue I go down is also providing them with these psychological skills so that they can manage that setback and that failure, but then they can also develop that resilience. Okay, because resilience is an interesting one in terms of some people see it as a characteristic and a trait, other people see it as resilience actually as a skill in itself that people can learn. So providing them with some psychological skills and some tools that they can, if something is, not going as well as they want it to be, or even if they're having the best game of their life, to make them even better, use a bit of positive psychology and working on their strengths. Let's provide them with some skills, and that can vary from goal setting, positive self-talk, breathing techniques, imagery, loads of different skills that are available to really help them then, if they've got that setback, reflecting on what's happened, and then say to them, well, the next time that happens, let's think of a trigger word that's going to help you to reset and refocus and get you back in that game or back in that training session to still be the best version that you possibly can be. So that's, I guess, my two ways really when people come to me and they want help with that area.
What are some common mental health challenges you've observed in athletes, and how do you address them?
So there's lots, I guess, of different areas that athletes will come and present to me when I'm working with them. I guess I did think about a couple that are more linked to that mental health side of things. And I guess some of the things that they present to me are things like their stress, stress levels, anxiety, nerves. And also I've thought about burnout as well, because, and I'll talk a bit more about each of them in detail. But for example, um, we know that sport is a high volume of pressure. We know there's a lot of demands placed on athletes. We know that there's a lot of sacrifices that they have to make. And that's, obviously all part and parcel of wanting to become that elite level athlete. However, that all comes with a little bit of stress, for example. So they could be worried, they could be having to balance loads of different things, which means that obviously increases their stress levels. They could be nervous. It could be their first experience of competing in a major competition. It could be the fact that they're having to be performing to the top level so that they could be selected to be part of a team. It could be a variety of different things, but that links with anxiety levels, nerves. And again, I guess when athletes present to me different symptoms, it's definitely a longer continuum. So some obviously they maybe have more extreme levels of anxiety for whatever reasons, and others may just have, slightly lower levels of anxiety, but that can still have an impact in their sport. And so you still want to try and support them. And again, similar with their stress levels, again, it could be dependent upon, say, for example, I work a lot with sort of 16-year-olds. They have obviously their GCSEs, that, big exams at school, that's going to obviously heighten their stress levels. Also, if that comes in the same time as big competitions in their sport, again, it's like, where does that time, they've only got a finite amount of time, so where does that time kind of, where is it spread? So where do they allocate the time? Is it revision? Is it their training? So again, that can heighten their stress levels, and it's all just about helping them to, yeah, put some plans in place to recognize when those pinch points are going to occur. And then if you do that, you're going to then prevent, for example, the third area that I talked about, which is burnout, which is when they do too many things or they try and have too many spinning plates in one go. And then that's when you've got that issue of they just stop enjoying it, really. And touch wood, I've never had, many athletes being burnt out. But you can definitely tell when they're getting to that point where you're like, hang on, we need to evaluate the situation. And maybe you do need to cut back on certain things, or maybe you do need to switch some things around just so you're feeling better and you're taking care of yourself.
How do you approach breaking down the stigma surrounding mental health in sports?
So this is always an interesting one because, I think not just my area of sports psychology, but actually psychology in general is always, there's been a bit of a stigma around it. And I guess for me, it's just all about encouraging those conversations, encouraging those people to share their experiences, encouraging, for example, myself as modeling that behavior of if I'm struggling to share that with people, because then that hopefully will help, athletes and other individuals feel comfortable enough to share their own, experiences and issues as well. And we've seen it, for example, those higher profile athletes that started to share their stories. It's definitely encouraged then all athletes to feel like actually it's okay not to be okay, and that I can feel comfortable enough to share my experiences, and I've got that person or those people or that team around me that I know is going to help and support me. And I think that's huge as well, as having that individual to go and say, divulge and talk to them. So many times I'll have an athlete come and say they want a conversation with me, and I'll just actually be a sounding board for them. So I'll just sit there and I'll just listen, for them to share their experiences and talk to me about what's going on. And I won't necessarily offer any advice because it may not necessarily be relevant. And then at the end, they'll sort of look at me and go, oh, I feel so much better. And it's almost just like allowing them to have a safe space and a safe environment to just lift that weight off their shoulders. And I think the more that people do that, the more that people are vocal about doing that, and it's okay, to do that sort of stuff, the more you start to then break down the stigma. And also another thing is that now that sports psychologists are in the organizations, so it's almost again normalizing the service. It's not like previously it was like an add-on. Okay, so you used to have your coach and your, physical coach or whatever it is. And then you used to almost, psychology was kind of like an add-on service. But now we're in those organizations. So people are like, oh, okay, well, it's okay to go and see a psychologist. It's not, it's not a bad thing. I can just go and have a conversation. So I think that's some of the ways that we've started to break down that stigma, which is good.
What role does mental preparation play in an athlete's overall performance?
Yeah, so for me, I think this is a huge one. So this is one of my, like, key wins is that mental preparation, because again, back in the day, physical preparation was spoken about a lot. The athletes don't know that they need to warm up, they need to, increase their blood flow around the body, they need to increase their heart rate, they need to start to sweat maybe, so physically prepare themselves. But sometimes they don't think about the mental preparation and making sure that they're, mentally ready. And that mental preparation has so many layers as well. So it's not necessarily just an hour before the game or the match or the competition that they're in. Actually, it could be the day before, the night before. Have they got, for example, all their kit ready? Have they got all the snacks and the fuel that they need to be mentally ready to be, so they don't have to think about too much on the actual day. And then it's a case of, again, are they having a good night's sleep? Have they got a good sleep routine in place to help them, feel refreshed and ready for the next day? And then in the morning, it's all those things about, yes, it ties in from to a physical thing as well, but actually that element of, have they had a good breakfast? Okay, so if they had, have they had a good breakfast, and then during that breakfast they may have time to think about, what am I wanting to achieve in this game or this match? What am I wanting to achieve today? And so they do a bit of goal setting around it. And then, the closer they get, hopefully as a result of getting everything ready the night before, having a good breakfast, thinking about that, the closer they then get to the game, is that they can actually, or the match or the competition, they can go and actually enjoy that experience, rather than worrying about, oh, have I done this, and have I done this, and have I done this. It's almost like a checklist of, yeah, I've gone through all of that, and now I'm at this competition, and it means I can utilize all that mental energy. I see mental energy as a bucket. Okay, so it's almost, they can use that mental energy for when they're competing, so it's more efficient and effective, rather than wasting it because they're worrying that they haven't put their, I don't know, swimming hat in the bag, or their boots, or their socks. So it's those little things. And let's be honest, it's not rocket science, but it's the common sense. It's those, having that routine, that mental preparation routine, I think is really key for all, levels of athlete. Those at the elite will say how important it is, but actually those that are just starting out, doing something like that will hopefully preserve those enjoyment levels for much longer. And then, I mean, we can go into more depth in terms of when you get to then the competitions or the games or whatever, you can have specific, mental preparation routines that can go alongside that warm up, including those trigger words, or having that little bit of, if they've got that time between a warm up and actually doing something. Like I used to work with athletics, and so they'd have a bit of time between maybe the warm up and their race. That's when they maybe, incorporate a little bit of imagery, or incorporate maybe just some music. Music is so powerful. I say to them, create a positive playlist and just then listen to it on your headphones to keep you in that zone and keep you focused, but keep you in a good frame of mind. So yes, for me, mental preparation is a really important part.
Can you share an example of a mental technique or strategy that has made a significant difference for an athlete you've worked with?
Yeah. Yeah. So again, I was thinking about this, it took me a bit of time to think about this, because I've done loads of different things, and I was thinking, actually, what have I done that I could really show that was impactful? And I think one of the biggest ones was when I was working with a swimmer, and he was in a really good place, and then unfortunately something happened, and it meant that he couldn't compete at one of his biggest, it was one of the biggest competitions for him. So he'd done all that hard work, and then for someone, he actually got ill just before the competition, so it just meant he couldn't compete. And I think one of the biggest things for me was, after that, I went and I knew he wasn't happy and that he'd need to talk about it, but we were sat in my office, and he just was like, he just wasn't himself, and he couldn't really explain what was going on. So I was like, right, we're going to go for a walk and talk. And it was a nice day. It was a bit cold, but it was a nice day. So we went for a walk, and it just allowed him to just almost process what was going on in his brain, and then allowed him to just talk freely to me. And it was a bit of guided discovery. We went for a nice walk. I asked him some questions. And then afterwards, we were able to then make more of a, concrete plan of next steps of what we needed to do moving forward. But that technique of a walk and talk is, I did it with him, and it was really impactful. And so as and when I can, I get in out in the fresh air. It really just helped to sort of clear your mind, rather than being in, say, his normal sporting environment, which was a swimming pool, or in, say, for example, my office. We just went outside, got some fresh air. I didn't push him on anything. I just sort of said, look, what's going on? And he slowly but surely was able to kind of, because for him it was difficult sometimes to articulate what he wanted to say. So actually having that space around him, and that that nature around him, he felt comfortable to talk about what was going on. And then, as I said, we were able to make a good plan after that.
How do you work with coaches and teams to create a culture that supports positive mental well-being?
Yeah, great question. And I think it's so important that actually, we've been speaking about, it from an athlete's perspective, but actually how do those within, say, the coaches or the support team, how do they also help to promote that, that mental well-being? And actually, I've been really fortunate that I've been involved in a project that all the, we call it the home nations in the UK, but all the home nations have sort of bought into, which is this project around promoting a thriving environment. And thriving, what we mean by it is thinking about an athlete being able to not just from a performance perspective, but from a well-being perspective. So do the best that they can do, but from those, both those areas, performance and well-being. And one of the biggest takeaways from the work that we did is that thriving was everyone's business. So it wasn't just our role as a psychologist to come in and work with the athletes to promote this environment, but actually it was the role of the coaches, it was the role of the support team to create that environment. Don't get me wrong, we help them do that, but create that environment where you provided the athletes with, I don't know, opportunities to work or to train with all levels, so they could learn from each other, they could create a group around them, so they had that safety and they could talk to each other. And there was an opportunities to make those mistakes and those setbacks, but actually that was in that environment where afterwards they would be, there would be explanations from the coaches, there would be encouragements from their teammates to keep going. There would be opportunities to come and speak to us if they needed to. But it wasn't basically they didn't make it a big deal that it was a mistake, but they had to do that to allow them to grow and allow them to keep pushing themselves and do better. So allowing that athlete to thrive and encouraging the coaches and the support team to be part of that process, I think, is how we start to embed that culture. Simply educating the coaches, educating the support team that actually it's their role as much as it is ours. Because 9 times out of 10, when you're working with a team or in an organization, you may not necessarily be there 100% of the time like the coaches are, through whatever reasons. So actually, if they feel comfortable and confident to be able to either have those conversations or just to have that awareness of, yes, we are looking for performance, but actually we're looking at, well-being and making sure that they're okay and making sure that they're happy and they've got a smile on their face and they're enjoying it. And everyone has the opportunity to do that.
What signs might indicate an athlete is struggling with their mental health, and how should we respond?
I guess this is again an interesting one, in terms of, in my role, obviously every athlete is an individual and every athlete is unique. So the way that they will potentially respond or the way that they will, show that they're struggling is going to look, different for each individual. But I guess some of the generic sort of signs is sometimes they'll be very much out of their character. So they may be, if they're normally quite bubbly, they could be quite quiet and, sort of introverted. And again, vice versa. Some people that are normally quite quiet could be quite snappy. Their mood could be, shifted. They may not want to talk to anyone about things. They may want to isolate themselves in certain environments. So again, someone who's normally quite sociable may, and after training will always have conversations and stick around. They may just go to training, train, and then leave. So again, it may just be because they don't want to be around other individuals because they're struggling, or they just don't know how to express that they're struggling. So for me, a big thing is just watching almost their behaviors and seeing if they are, and again, I don't want to say normal, because what is normal, but normal to them, or are they, being slightly different? Are they, if a coach asked them to do something and they normally would do it quite easily, are they being a little bit more snappy, or are they asking more questions that they normally, want to, or are they trying to avoid certain situations? For me, I guess that's the biggest tell, is that if their behaviors or them in general as a person, um, is being slightly different than normal. And for me, the biggest thing is just to I think that's where these we know as psychologists that relationships are so key. So I would only know that as a psychologist because I've maybe built that relationship with those individuals. So through doing that, that's when I'm able to then, you talk about how do you respond. I would then probably feel comfortable enough to just go and say to them, is everything okay? Even me just giving them that metaphorical olive branch to say, what's going on? Is everything okay? Do you want to grab a coffee? Do you want to grab a drink? And sometimes to start with, they may just say a flat out no. I've had that before. No, I'm fine. And so you just say, okay, which to me signals they may not be ready yet, but I won't just give up. I'll persevere. And maybe the next time I see them, I'll say, how's everything going? What's going on? And that's when they may sort of say, actually, I need a little bit of help, or yeah, that coffee would be brilliant, or something like, or again, a walk and talk. Let's just go and have a conversation and sit outside on the wall or something like that and have a chat. And then that's how I would, respond. So yeah, it's kind of it's realizing maybe when they're slightly out of character, and then it's just again just having that patience to when they're ready, they will talk, I think is the best way.
How do you help athletes transition to life after sports from a mental perspective?
Transitioning out of sport again is that big subject area. Obviously, you want them to do as well as they possibly can when they're in their sport and when they're training and competing and all that sort of stuff. But we all know that they can't be, athletes for the rest of their life. They obviously can if they want to do it just on a from a social perspective, and but actually some athletes at the top level, there comes a time where they think, right, maybe I need to think about transitioning out in terms of, if it's nicely out, in terms of retirement. But then also there's that other element to this, which is if they say, for example, get a career ending injury and then they have to transition out of sport quicker than they wanted to. So I guess the way I approach it is similar but slightly different for the two different sort of areas. So if they're, say, retiring and transitioning out of sport on their terms, they're much more accepting of it. So then you can kind of just really help them to plan out, what does that look like? Are there things, say, for example, they're thinking of retiring at the end of the season? Are there goals or any targets that they want to achieve beforehand? And you try and help them to map that out. For some of them, for example, they may want to stop competing or retire on a certain competition or game or whatever it is. So again, just making sure that everything's in place to be able to do that. And also, we talked about it right at the start, is that athletes are individuals. They're so much more from an identity perspective, as an athlete. So actually just again having those conversations of, who are you in terms of, as well as an athlete, what else is your identity? So that could be help them to then transition out, because they may have something else to go into. They may want to go into coaching, they may want to go and do something at university, they may want to, I don't know, some people retire because they want to start a family. But whatever that reasoning is, at least if they have that understanding, and they have those steps in place, and you've had those conversations with them, I think it's a much more proactive approach, and it's a much more, they're much happier with it. They accept it much more, and it's an enjoyable process for them to transition out of that sport. Whereas you've got the other side of things, which is sometimes when, say, for example, they've had that career-ending injury, and then for whatever reason they can't, they maybe have an operation and they do all the rehab, but they can't go back into their sport. That's when you maybe sometimes have to have, some more in-depth conversations and really help them through that process of acceptance of, no, you're not going to go back into your sport. However, if you still want to be involved in it, how else, what else does that look like? For example, I worked with a footballer, and very sadly she had a career-ending injury. It was an injury to her knee. It wasn't the nicest, but then we had those conversations of accepting it, and then actually it turned into, she really put her all into the rehab process. And then I was like, well, if you love football, for example, I said, let's think about coaching badges that you can do. And now actually she is a coach at one of the, teams that I used to work with. So she's been able to go through that, process alongside the rehab. So I think from a mental health and wellbeing perspective, that doing those coaching badges almost distracted her from the fact that she wasn't necessarily able to play football at the level that she wanted to again. So that just helped, that helped her from a wellbeing perspective accept it a little bit more.
What advice would you give to athletes who may be hesitant to seek help?
Yeah. So obviously I think every athlete has to come to wanting to get help in that, in their own way, and they're at their own time. But I think one of my biggest advice is, don't try and suffer in silence. Don't try and keep it all in, and don't say anything, and then it just makes it worse and worse for that individual. So, if they've got, though, even if it's just someone, it may not necessarily be a professional to start with, even if it's just someone in the family, or a close friend, or a close teammate, or a training partner, whoever it is, if they've got someone that they can just have a conversation with and talk to and share, how they're feeling, I think that's huge, because at least you're just, almost breaking down that initial barrier and getting over that initial hurdle before maybe then you need to go and seek some more professional help. But definitely, yeah, don't suffer in silence. Try and find that individual that's going to help and support you. And I guess it's just trying to, the more that we can just try and normalize that, yeah, not everyone, you may see them and they've got a smile on their face, but they may, everything may not be going as well as they want to. So it's just, everyone will probably be having and experiencing, different things at different times. So it's again sharing that, with each other, with that support system. I've just started to do some work with referees, and we've started introducing that buddy system. So, they can talk to each other and they've got their buddies. And again, when you're part of a team sport, it's something that's so much, it's so nice, because you've got more than just one of you. You've got a group of you that are all experiencing very similar situations. So you can share those experiences and talk to each other about how you're thinking and feeling at different times. So yeah, don't suffer in silence. Always try and share.